Sergeant, you want some of this new Cool Whip topping?
Later, Pyle. I'm getting in shape in case our Cool Whip contest winner's a girl. Anybody can win a trip to Hollywood and a guest appearance on the show.
On screen, Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter came across as the perfect military man, loud, strict, and always one step away from losing his temper. But the person behind that voice, Frank Sutton, was living with a far more complex reality. His rise to TV stardom wasn't just about playing a role. It was about turning real-life pain, setbacks, and determination into a character the world came to love, and often misunderstood. Frank Sutton had always dreamed of becoming a Marine. When World War II began, he rushed to sign up. But something unexpected stopped him: a color vision test. He failed it, which meant he couldn't join the Marine Corps at all. For someone who respected the Marines so deeply, it was a crushing setback. But Sutton didn't let that end his goal of serving. He chose a different path and joined the U.S. Army instead. He was sent to the Pacific Theater and took part in 14 combat assault landings. That's right, 14. That's not the background of someone pampered by Hollywood. That's the record of a battle-hardened soldier. He earned both the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. The man who later played a Marine on TV wasn't allowed into the Corps, but he still put his life on the line in the jungle. Yet most people never talked about that part of his life. When Gomer Pyle, USMC, aired in 1964, audiences quickly connected with Sutton's commanding screen presence. His role as Sergeant Carter felt so real that many viewers assumed it wasn't acting at all. But that belief followed Sutton throughout his career. People expected him to be loud, aggressive, and constantly fired up. In reality, Sutton was a quiet, private man. He enjoyed reading more than arguing, and he disliked being boxed into a stereotype. People who worked with him said he was thoughtful, intelligent, and fully committed to his work. But, once the filming ended, the real Frank Sutton often disappeared into the background. The image of Sergeant Carter was so strong that it overshadowed who he truly was. Even when asked about his military past, Sutton rarely spoke in detail. He would shift the topic or downplay his own story. Still, there was one answer that stood out. When someone asked if his real-life combat experience helped him play Sergeant Carter, Sutton simply nodded and said, "I just remember what it felt like to be scared and trying not to show it." That short line revealed so much. The yelling, the anger, the tension in Sergeant Carter. It wasn't just acting. It came from something real and personal. So, why did Sutton stay so quiet about his service? Some think it was because of humility. Others believe he carried pain he never fully dealt with. What is clear is that the character people laughed at on screen was shaped by someone who had faced far more serious battles than anything Gomer Pyle ever brought to camp. But that wasn't the full picture. What viewers didn't see when the cameras stopped revealed even more about who Frank Sutton really was. To millions, he seemed like the classic tough guy. His voice was sharp enough to cut through any room. His glare could silence a crowd, and his timing on screen was flawless. But off-camera, Sutton was almost the opposite: quiet, thoughtful, and reserved. Once filming ended, another side of him came into focus, one most people never expected. Frank Sutton wasn't just a performer, he was a serious thinker. Before he ever landed his breakout role, he was already working toward a very different kind of achievement. After serving in World War II, he didn't run straight to Hollywood. He enrolled at Columbia University and earned a degree in drama, graduating with honors. This wasn't a casual hobby. He was committed to learning, to improving, and to treating acting as a real discipline. His education wasn't a backup plan. It was central to who he was. People who worked with him often commented on how different he was in private. While some actors passed time joking between takes, Sutton was usually reading. And not scripts, he carried books. He'd read biographies, novels, even works of philosophy on set. Crew members said he always seemed to need something more engaging than just comedy. Some joked that he had the loudest voice in Hollywood and the quietest mind behind it. It was a strange mix that kept people curious. One of the most honest moments came when Sutton agreed to do a political interview in the late 1960s. When asked to give his views on the state of the country, he replied, "I'm no more an authority than the elevator man." It wasn't meant as a joke. He was being sincere. He knew people confused him with the confident Sergeant Carter, but he didn't believe he had the right to speak for the public. That answer stuck with people. It made them wonder if Sutton was ever fully at ease with the fame his role brought him. There were also times when his reluctance to play along with Hollywood expectations created some friction. He didn't chase headlines. He rarely went to industry events. He almost never gave interviews. That wasn't about ego. It was about keeping a distance. The man who built a career out of shouting on screen was someone who kept his private life incredibly quiet. Friends said he found peace in spending time with his family, working in theater, and reading. For him, fame was just background noise. He had other priorities, and that quiet focus shaped everything he did behind the scenes. He was far too intelligent to be stuck in just one role, and far too genuine to keep acting like Sergeant Carter when the cameras weren't rolling. But the more fans connected with the loud Marine character, the more Frank Sutton started to quietly distance himself. The pressure wasn't coming from Hollywood. It was coming from within. And what happened next brought that pressure into full view. By the second season of Gomer Pyle, USMC, the show's ratings had soared. Millions tuned in weekly to watch the odd but entertaining dynamic between the kind-hearted, quirky Gomer and the hot-headed Sergeant Carter. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But behind the scenes, Frank Sutton was starting to feel uneasy. The stress was building, and so was the tension. Working alongside Jim Nabors, who played Gomer, should have been simple. Nabors was known for being calm, courteous, and easygoing. But Sutton had high standards. Every moment on set mattered to him. Every word had to be right. He brought a level of focus to rehearsals that even experienced crew members didn't expect. While Nabors was relaxed and easygoing, Sutton treated every scene like a live theater performance. At first, that contrast helped the show. Sutton's strong presence balanced Nabors' gentle delivery, but over time, it became clear they were approaching the work in very different ways. Rumors began to spread, first in hushed tones, then more openly. People on set noticed tense silences between takes. Sutton often looked annoyed when scenes dragged or leaned too far into comedy. He hated delays. He wanted everything to be tight, and when it wasn't, his frustration was hard to miss. He never caused a scene, but his silence said enough. One producer remembered, Frank didn't yell. But when he went quiet, you could feel the room change. Meanwhile, Jim Nabors was stepping into a new level of fame. His singing career was gaining momentum, and some began to feel he wasn't as focused on the show as before. A few even quietly accused him of going through the motions. Sutton, who valued discipline above everything, didn't take that lightly. He believed the work deserved full attention. And when Nabors seemed distracted, it clashed with everything Sutton stood for. The tension grew slowly, but steadily. Not with loud arguments, but through long pauses, awkward rehearsals, and increasing distance between the two. They weren't fighting, but they weren't friendly either. By season 4, insiders say they barely spoke unless they were filming. When they did interact, it was strictly about the job. That cold professionalism made others on set uncomfortable. But on camera, none of it was visible. Sutton kept everything tightly controlled. No matter what was happening off-set, he switched into character the moment filming began. That discipline likely came from his real experience in the military. He didn't let personal feelings interfere with the task. Still, Those around him could sense something. The role that brought him fame was also starting to weigh him down. Sutton began to question how long he could keep playing a character so different from who he really was. Sergeant Carter had become his armor. But after a while, even armor gets too heavy. Then came the turning point. Jim Neighbors decided to leave, and Sutton saw it coming. But what followed still hit him hard. It wasn't just unexpected, it was personal. When Neighbors announced his decision to leave Gomer Pyle, USMC, the news shocked the cast and crew, but no one felt it more deeply than Frank Sutton. For years, his life had revolved around the show. He didn't just act, he lived the role. It filled his schedule, shaped how the world saw him, and gave him purpose. And then, just like that, it ended. Neighbors said he was worn out. After 5 seasons, reruns, side gigs, and non-stop attention, he needed a break. He wanted to focus on music, live performances, and peace of mind. The network tried to keep him, but he had made up his mind. Sutton, who had already started pulling away from people outside of work, didn't try to stop it. In public, he acted with grace, but those close to him said he took it hard. There was talk about a possible spin-off. Network execs considered giving Sergeant Carter his own show. Sutton was interested but hesitant. He didn't want to be stuck playing the same role forever. At the same time, it was the only role producers offered him. Scripts kept coming, but they all wanted another yelling sergeant or strict authority figure. Sutton rejected most of them. "I already played that guy," he told a friend. "I don't need to become him." What followed was a quiet, in-between time in Sutton's life. He wasn't completely out of work, but he wasn't in high demand either. Offers came occasionally. He showed up in variety shows, took on some theater, and did a few commercials. But nothing had the same impact as Gomer Pyle. The spotlight he once stood in had started to fade, and for a man who had grown used to being recognized everywhere, the adjustment wasn't easy. Even harder was changing how people saw him. No matter where he went, fans still treated him like Sergeant Carter. Strangers shouted catchphrases. Kids saluted him in stores. Adults asked him to yell like he did on TV. At first, it felt flattering, but eventually, it became exhausting. No matter what he tried, people saw only the tough-talking sergeant. They didn't see the decorated veteran, the Ivy League graduate, or the serious theater actor. Just the character. During this time, Sutton's family noticed a change. He became quieter, more reserved, not angry, just distant. He poured himself into local theater, hoping to find the kind of real, grounded acting TV no longer gave him. On stage, he could play different roles, ones that felt honest, and even though the audiences were smaller, their response meant more. But the weight of expectations never completely disappeared. The typecasting, the reputation, and the character he couldn't escape, they all stayed with him. Then, in 1974, just as Sutton seemed to be rediscovering his passion on stage, everything changed. What happened next shocked everyone, and no one was ready for what would become the final chapter. On June 28, 1974, the town of Shreveport, Louisiana, was quietly buzzing with excitement. Live theater was in town, and Frank Sutton had arrived a few days earlier to star in the play Love, a clever romantic comedy that was a far cry from the military roles he had become known for. This was meant to mark a new beginning for him. That humid evening, Sutton stepped into his dressing room between performances. Everything seemed normal, but he never came back out. He collapsed almost immediately. A major heart attack had struck. Sudden and severe. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. Frank Sutton was just 50 years old when he passed away. The news spread fast and left fans in disbelief. How could the loud, intense, no-nonsense Sergeant Carter be gone so suddenly? But those who knew Sutton weren't shocked by the quiet that followed. He had always lived that way. No drama, no headlines, just steady commitment, and then silence. He died while doing what he loved most, performing live in front of an audience, far from the glare of Hollywood. To the people who knew him well, it felt strangely fitting. Heartbreaking, yes, but meaningful. Sutton had always carried a quiet struggle with the fame that followed Gomer Pyle. The show made him famous, but it also locked him into a single image, one he spent years trying to move past. Even so, tributes began pouring in. Jim Nabors, deeply shaken, issued a short statement, calling Sutton a talented actor and a good person. But beyond the headlines, many fans started to realize they hadn't seen the full picture. They remembered the shouting, the tough guy attitude, the iconic military persona. What they didn't see was the veteran, the thinker, the family man, the person who might have been carrying much more than anyone knew. His family kept everything private. A small funeral, no cameras, no press, just a close group of loved ones. Sutton's wife, Toby, whom he married back in 1946, never publicly spoke about how her husband dealt with fame. But years later, their son Joe, now a successful playwright, offered a rare insight. He said, "My father was much more than a character actor. He lived a full life and paid a price for that character's success." Frank Sutton's legacy turned out to be more complex than many expected. To millions, he would always be remembered as Sergeant Carter, loud, commanding, and unforgettable. But behind that role was someone trying to be seen for who he really was. A man who served in the military, who read serious literature on set, and who found more joy in stage acting than in stardom. In the end, maybe what he truly wanted wasn't to be famous, but to be respected. He didn't chase the spotlight. He looked for something genuine, the kind of legacy that doesn't make noise but still lasts. And even with all that recognition, one question kept coming up, a question fans and critics asked again and again. What actually happened behind the scenes of Gomer Pyle? And did Sutton ever make peace with what that show took from him? For years after his death, Sutton's legacy stayed mostly untouched. Fans continued to watch Gomer Pyle, USMC, and his character became a classic figure in American TV history. But the deeper side of his story, the real person behind the screen, remained hidden behind respectful tributes and long-standing silence. Until something new surfaced. In 2023, a previously forgotten audio interview came to light. It had been digitized by a university archive and quietly uploaded online. The tape was recorded in the early 1970s, just a few years before Sutton died. For nearly 5 decades, Sutton had never spoken publicly about the behind-the-scenes issues on the Gomer Pyle set. Not once. But in this interview, recorded during a break from one of his stage performances, he finally opened up. The interviewer asked a simple question. "Do you miss the show?" There was a pause. Then Sutton answered, "I miss working. I miss doing something people care about. But the show, number it boxed me in. You know how some actors get stuck? I became the mold." He continued carefully, not with anger, but with honesty. "Jim Nabors was good at what he did, but we were never close. We worked differently. We thought differently. I respected him, but it wasn't easy." The tape crackled slightly, and Sutton gave a tired laugh. "I was yelling half the time because I was frustrated. Not with him, but with the job. With how small it all felt." That single sentence, "how small it all felt," hit hard. The man who seemed larger than life on screen had quietly been feeling trapped in the very role that made him famous. Over the next few years, more details started to come out. Ronnie Schell, another cast member, spoke at a reunion event in 2024. He admitted Sutton had been struggling more than most people realized. He was private. He took the work seriously, but I think he was lonely, not sad, just distant. Even Jim Nabors, before his death in 2017, hinted at the same thing in an interview. He didn't love fame like a lot of people do. He loved the work. That's what drove him. As documentaries and nostalgia content picked up traction online, Sutton's name began to reappear. Not just as part of TV history, but as a reminder. His life told a story about what fame can do, how it can lift someone up and hold them in place at the same time, and how the characters we love the most often come from people who say the least. To many fans, discovering this other side of Frank Sutton only made them admire him more. The veteran who became a comic character, but never let that define his whole life. The Ivy League graduate who played the tough guy, but never stopped learning. The loud, commanding presence on screen who lived the rest of his life quietly. Now, all these years later, Frank Sutton is finally being understood, not through the voice of a TV drill sergeant, but through something more lasting. Honesty. Frank Sutton never asked for fame. What he wanted was to be truly great. And in many ways he was, but not for the reasons most people thought. It wasn't just the yelling or the punchlines that made him unforgettable. It was the depth he kept behind all of that. A soldier-turned-actor who carried real pain beneath the performance. A committed artist stuck inside a loud character. A man whose quiet presence said more than any of his scenes ever could. His story isn't just about a TV show. It's about identity. About what happens when the world clings to a version of you that doesn't match who you really are. Sutton spent his last years trying to take back that identity, not through interviews or fame, but by choosing quiet towns, small productions, and real connection. And maybe that's why his story feels so real today. In a world that rewards the loudest voices, Sutton chose to live quietly. He picked authenticity over recognition, work over celebrity, honesty over ease. So next time you catch an old episode of Gomer Pyle, take a closer look. Behind the shouting and the scowling is a man who gave everything to that role, maybe too much. But also a man who found peace not by staying in the spotlight, but by stepping away from it. Frank Sutton never told the full story while he was alive. But now, all these years later, it's finally being told. Thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next video.